Hi, I am Tony Russo, and this is Funeral Service Insider, the podcast. Conversations worth having about death care and end-of-life care. And this week, we're focusing a little bit more on end-of-life care as it transitions into death care. Speaking with Doulas Simpson, he is the executive director of INELDA. That is the End-of-Life Doula Association. And we're going to talk about how he came to be the executive director. He's got a really great story about his involvement in end-of-life care, but mostly we're going to talk about how the future and the relatively near future of both end-of-life doulas and funeral directors are bound to intertwine, and what that means for education and mutual aid.
But anyway, that is enough from me. Let's get into this conversation with Doulas Simpson.
So the last couple episodes have been alternate approaches to death care heavy. And so I'm very, very happy to speak with you about where kind of doulas fit into the whole thing. But before we get to that, I'd like to know where you fit into the whole thing. So can you tell me how you got to where you are today? What got you involved in the end-of-life space and in the doula space specifically?
Sure, absolutely. When I reflect back on my journey, it was my son's home birth, but prior to that, my dad passed away in 2016, and as most people have, a profound experience and a sad experience, a curious experience, a overwhelming grief. And so I had that experience in 2016, and I remember, of course, this is reflecting back, after my dad was taken out of our home, I always describe it as the calm before a snowstorm, with the silence. You can actually hear the silence.
Yeah.
I remember my dad's body had been taken out, and I was sitting in the room and just looking out the window, and I could hear the silence. That is April of 2016. Fast forward to my son being born at home, we had used midwives and a birth doula, and we lived in a very busy corner, and my son was born in the afternoon. And I remember looking out the window, and once again, all this life happening and going on, but I could hear the silence again. I could hear the silence. And I have leaned into those transitions in remembering back to 16 when I had that same, I could hear the snowstorm, the quietness, and I could see, and it has me just reflecting on how life in the world is evolving around us. Yet my dad exited the world in this kind of peaceful silence, and my son was born in this peaceful silence going on. And I somehow have connected those two. And during one of our midwives' visits, the day we heard our son's heartbeat for the first time, the midwife said when she was done bringing life into the world, she would sit with people as she died. And that I started reflecting on that. I'm like, is this what she means? Like my son and my dad? And I reached out to her, and she had taken a death doula training, and unbeknownst to me, our birth doula was also a death doula, and they recommended INELDA. I looked at it. It ended up working out, and I ended up taking INELDA's training in 2018 and found myself in a place like a lot of other individuals, curious, scared. What do I know? What don't I know? But these people want to talk about death, and they're curious, and went through the training and came out of that training even more like, okay, this feels like a place I want to be in. I don't know how to be in this space. So I reached out to the founders of INELDA at the time and said, I want to volunteer. My whole life has been in retail, but this feels like someplace, how can I help? And they're like, well, we've never had volunteers. call us in December. And I reached back out in December, and one of the founders, they were all gracious enough to say, okay, we can have you as a volunteer. One of the founders was even more gracious to allow me to come to her home. So I went to her home and began volunteering in her home, doing the administrative components of the training. But I always reflect back on this what I got was more of a mentorship. That one of the all the founders, co-founders were doulas. And so I was every day on the phone or in person with this co-founder who shared her profound experiences and also gave me guidance as I was, accompanying a close friend's mother, my uncle. So I've got more than just doing, a volunteer admin role. And then as the years went on, two of the co-founders left in 2020. The third co-founder left at the end of 21, and we went from founder-led to board-led.
Mm.
And at that point, the board, I was able to interview with the board and became the executive director in January of 2022. And that's the position I currently hold. I just would like to add one more quick thing of
Sure.
why I stay. I mean, I get that question a lot, like, well, that brought you here, but what keeps you here? And I reflect back on some of my personal experiences. Once again, my dad, who I was scared to death to give him the medicine. I had to give him medicine, at 4 hours and 6 hours and 8 hours, and it was coming out of his mouth. And then the death rattle came and all this stuff, and how much I didn't know and what I thought I was doing wrong. Fast forward to 21, and my mother-in-law goes in for what she thinks is COVID on a Sunday. And by the following Sunday, she's on hospice because she has all this major artery block in her heart. And my partner knew that's not the quality of life his mother wanted, so brought her home on the following Sunday. And I was able to, have time with her, and even reflecting. And I was telling my partner, I think your mom's, I called her Susanita, was in active dying. And I said, this is something I'm observing. Once again, I'm no expert in dying, but I see her changing. And they called the hospice nurse. The hospice was like, there's no way she's an active die. Absolutely not, but we'll stop by. And sure enough, they identified she was an active dying. And what that piece of knowledge gave us was able to have a conversation with my partner to say, there are days here now. We've got days. Do you want to spend tonight here? Do you want to spend tomorrow? We were able to bring our son in and to have him say goodbye to her. We also had found out we were just on Tuesday night that we were having another child, and we knew it was going to be a girl. And I'll never forget the juxtaposition of my mother-in-law breathing, her labored breathing, with hearing our daughter's first heartbeats. Like, it's a vision I'll never forget. And so we were able to tell her on Wednesday that she'd be a grandmother again to a little girl, and she died Thursday. And so when I reflect on it holistically, right, I had so much more knowledge and understanding that what she was going through was a natural process. I knew some guidance around timing, so we could make these different decisions of like having our son be part of it, telling her about our daughter, where in 2016, I was very privileged and part of a system. So my dad went into the hospital, then he went into a nursing home to get him the 19 shots he needed for his cancer. So I spent all this time of just doing. And I spent so much more time with my mother-in-law being present and making really, I think, deep and thoughtful decisions. And so I share that because I feel like there's a personal desire to give back and educate, have awareness around death that, doesn't take away the loss or the grieving, but there is some comfort in understanding the process and knowing and having the opportunity to make the decisions.
One of the things that I love about what you just said, I mean, thank you for sharing the stories. The idea that the employer was more of a mentor, the founder was more of a mentor at the time, because one of the things that I liked about the research that I did into INELDA is that mentorship, that practicum aspect is like the critical part. And the one thing that kind of separates you guys as an organization is you make sure that people don't just have the knowledge, but they have the experience and they have someone with whom they've worked. Can you tell me about how that developed and maybe expand a little bit more on why and what you do as far as making sure that people are experienced before you set them loose on the world?
It's interesting because when it directly goes back to my experience, we knew when we were training, when I took over as the executive director, people were coming out of the training and we said, okay, you've got to be certified to open a business. And in personal reflection in my leadership style or my lived experience was, but I get all this knowledge, right? I got this firsthand knowledge from a founder. So how do we bring that into our programs? How do we bring this mentorship? There's so many steps when you come out of a training that are possible before you actually decide to open a business or move into a certification or continuing ed. And so it really came from this place of, this is what I was given. How do we replicate this, right? How do we replicate this brand new doula out of training with an experienced doula that has supported dozens and hundreds of individuals? And how do we create that? And that's what has led us into, doing peer groups. We will be moving forward with individual mentorship, because we get a lot of individuals that look for one-on-one. We offer the group, moving into that. And it leads into, and perhaps we'll get there later in the conversation, about certification and why we believe that's important in education. But what I've learned now, and I've spoken to some also very experienced doulas that the organization has trained back in 17 before me, and even 16, the need for this apprenticeship, this need for new doulas. There's so much questioning. There's so much doubt. Am I going to do the right thing, say the wrong thing? And how wonderful to have this, if doulas are companionships in this journey in the end of life, how wonderful for a doula to have a companion that can support them and have these dialogue and conversations around, just as I did with what I'm saying, my uncle's asking me this and doing me this, and I feel like this. And the co-founder also didn't give me the answers, right? What she did was said, well, here's something to consider. Here's something to consider. And it became also the basis for our community of practice, right? Death is the educator here, right? We are facilitating these spaces. And so we go into a training space, we all have lived experiences. And so how collectively can we support each other in a peer group, right? I may be able to come into a peer group saying, I'm supporting this individual and this is happening. And it doesn't need to be an INELDA educator. It's the community can give us lots of knowledge. And so in that essence is what we've tried to replicate, that the doulas are supported as they continue. And then hopefully as they become more comfortable, more education, more time with the dying, they give back, right? They give back to the next doula they see, or a companion.
Beyond that is this notion that you have a community that you're responsible to. Like when you have the knowledge and it's just in your head, you're like, okay, well, I'm the expert and I'm going to say how things go. But when you have a community that you're a part of and a practice that you've come into, you know that there's a responsibility there. One of the things that, speaking with young funeral directors, they're like, well, you're under a person and they do things their way and you do things their way because you have to. And while you're doing things their way, you're like, okay, well, I would do this differently. I would do this the same, know? And I imagine that it feels like that's the same thing. Like you being part of you're being part of a tradition. You're not starting from scratch and deciding this is what doula-ing is. You may be deciding this is my take on it, but in an informed way. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely, in an informed way, because you're coming through your own life and journeys, and you have your own communities that you want to serve. And I really like the word informed. You're saying, well, when Doug is doing this, this is how he's approaching it, and when somebody else is doing it this way, they're saying this and this, and it forms the doula to create their own pathway into this care. Yeah, and that's when their pathway will say, well, I'm not going to do it exactly like this. I might go serve just this community. I might be more broad and serve all the community. I might just do sitting it when somebody's actively dying. I might do advanced care planning. Where's my path into this death care space?
Hey folks, I want to just take a second to talk to you about Kates-Boylston's events. We do both virtual and in-person events throughout the year. You can find all of the events we have at events.kates-boylston.com. What's really cool about going to that website, that page, I guess, is that you can also see all of our past events for just the cost of your email address. So you can log on and take a look at all of the events that we've already done. We just did a great one on cremation innovations, and we do have one coming up on cemetery grounds and structures. And our catalog is available going back years and years of great information and fantastic presentations. So I can't recommend it enough. Make sure you take a look at it, events.kates-boylston.com. And of course, as always, there is a link in the show notes. The other people that I like to talk to who I wish were more involved in funeral service, or funeral service is more involved with, let me put it correctly, is hospice. And for the same reason, these kind of three professions work with the same people. And it would be cool if they, got along with one another better.
I agree. And I think there's been real movement. And, doulas are a complement. We're not a replacement. We're not a lot of, I think, individuals or professionals worry that we're there to take their job, or we already do what the doula does, right? And there's a real need for doulas because there's gaps. There's gaps in systems. There's gaps. Doulas have time. And so if a system is set up where I've got to see X amount of patients a day, then they're driven by time. And what doulas have is we certainly have time. And I was recently asked the question if I've seen any movement in hospice. When I trained in 18, it was like, okay, now go out, go to volunteer to hospice, but don't tell them you're a doula yet. Don't tell them that. Just go in there. And then after maybe a year or so, you've built some trust, you might say, by the way, I've taken this training at INELDA. And do you mind if I do? And whereas now we've trained over a dozen different hospice organizations, and we're starting to see integration. We're starting to see various ways. And so in my time in this field, it has opened up. But there are still individuals that are untrusting of the role and don't understand the role. But that becomes more of a public awareness and even an education and time for dialogue to say that there are lots of needs people have as they're dying. And there are lots of people with unmet needs. And so how do we collectively, as a body, as a funeral body, as a hospice body, and a doula body, support these individuals on what they need, right? They can drive it. It's their journey. And so what are they choosing? They want more hospice. They want a doula to talk about what their end-of-life options are after somebody dies. They want the funeral director. And we're there to, I think, we're in a supporting role, an educating role.
Kind of along those lines, I know there are multiple ways, like I don't want to say there are no rules, but there aren't, right? For becoming the doula. The awful joke that I like to say is, you can spend years doing it, or you can go to Vistaprint and print up a business card that says I'm a doula, which is not radically different from funeral directors 150 years ago, when they're being cabinet makers and things like that. But does there need to be, do you think, a move toward knowing the difference, like expecting that if you have there are so few people, I'm sorry to keep putting this question a different way. There are so few people who know what doulas are. What is the challenge between saying, not only am I a doula, but I'm actually trained by people? Is there kind of any kind of move towards centralization? Because I know that's a fraught topic among doulas that I've spoken with.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I think if where the information I sit with, that I would probably think there's 60 to 70% of the population, or 60% that says don't regulate this. If you regulate this body of care, then we're going to become too systematized in this, and we're going to lose this heart-led care we provide. And then there's the other percentage that believes in this credentialing and some overall standards. Where INELDA sits in this space is I'll go back to myself first. If I was looking to hire a doula, I'd want to know, where did they train? What type of program did they come from, right? Is my family more spiritual based, and this doula took a training that's less spiritual, or this individual took a training that's much more aftercare? What type of training? And then, just as I'd want a doula that has been with dozens of individuals that have been dying, right? Once again, I say death is the teacher, but if I'm hiring a plumber, right? Am I hiring a plumber that's right out of school, or I'm saying this plumber's been around, he's been 10 years of business, and so there's a lot of professional experience and lived experience that they can lead into to help me, and that, I think, is probably a better way for the field to evolve. We have certification individuals. There are individuals, I've been in places where say it's a piece of paper, it doesn't mean anything. You're still creating hierarchy in this field. There are other individuals that say, take our training and go to another organization and get a proficiency badge. Other organizations, they take our training and go to INELDA for certification. The goal of the organization, I think it's probably the goal of any doula training, is to create competent doulas. And how do we do that? How do we lean into that? And then if we create a competent doula, then what does that look like? So we spent some time on creating our core competencies. And so as an organization, you can say, okay, if you come to INELDA, you're getting your 40 hours of foundational training. You want to do additional education and learning. We've got this 95-hour 1-year certification program. And part of our program, and it's been I can hear the founders, it was absolutely critical for the founders to have direct care as provided as part of like the additional education. And so that, our training is 40 hours. Do we cover everything in depth? No, but we unlock a lot of areas. And so where's the continuing education? Where's the apprenticeship or mentorship when I'm providing direct care? You can't get that if you're going to take an assessment or test. Then at that point, it's, it's head knowledge, right? It's not the real experience in sitting bedside. So we've committed to that, and that will always be part of our ethos, that there's direct care in the certification. And what I think, as you said, this is a hot topic in the movement. Like, I think, where INELDA's leaning into, and I'm probably sharing a lot, is we're leaning into what is the saturation, what is the education and experience, and how do we communicate that on our doula directory? If you're going to look for a doula, right, what is their education and what is their saturation? How much education do they have around end of life, death care, and how much lived experience in sitting with individuals that are dying do they have? So that the dying person, their family, their circle of care, institutions can say, oh, okay, I'm in a hospice organization, so I think we need a doula that shows these competencies. Therefore, it's important to the organization to have somebody that has taken a base training and had a certification or some type of credential. You might be a faith-based organization where you want some just knowledge about end of life and dying. And so, okay, the competencies of an end of life trained doula, that's the competencies. And so trying to create the competencies that the provider is looking for to choose. And we're not there yet, but that's the direction we're certainly heading. And the other thing that's really important that I hear a lot is, well, then we create this hierarchy, we create this credentialing, and so therefore we've pushed out all this ancestral knowledge. And so where is ancestral knowledge when individuals were the go-to person in their community? They're here. And so we are actively looking to create a path in that says, okay, like Doug, you had no experience. Your father died and you were moved here. Okay, you're coming in a training path. Okay, the individual over here has been the go-to in the family. It's been ancestral, and they're the ones that are called in their community or family. And so they bring this knowledge. How do we bring them into also recognize their competence? And so we don't leave out this real ancestral knowledge. And, people have been caring for people as long as people have been dying.
Right.
And so for us to say now, oh, you community member for 30 years don't fit into this system or don't get recognized, we have to make sure the system is wide enough, or the structure we're creating, that there's a place in. So I shared a lot, and hopefully I've answered the question. I can certainly be more specific.
No. I understand it. It's so funny. So when because Colorado didn't have a funeral director's license until last year, and I spoke with one of the educators there in Colorado, and she said to me, "Oh no, I mean, we've been a program forever. If you wanted to be, if you wanted the knowledge, you could come and get it." And I think that is, for me, that just kind of crystallized everything. Like if this is something you want to do, then I would be suspicious if you didn't want to talk to professionals who were already doing it about how to do it.
Mm-hmm. And there's and like even going back to with the co-founder being my mentor, right? She had years of experience that I was absorbing, right? And so going in and gaining that, and so if once again the ancestral knowledge or something's been passed on, bringing those individuals into our community of practice only makes it a more accessible and richer community.
And so let's talk about working with funeral homes or outreach to funeral
Mm-hmm.
homes or you know, increasingly young funeral directors are also getting certified. This is something that it's not common, but it's not uncommon, I think is the way to put it. And can you talk to me about, do you guys have like a program for funeral directors or some sort of outreach that you do to, young funeral directors or to mortuary schools or to anything like that? Or
We don't yet, but our roadmap is long,
well, yeah, no, there's
wide.
plenty to do.
Um,
You're an old profession, but a new industry.
But when I sit in the training spaces, I do. There's a funeral director in Canada that been engaged and became into the community of practice, and even when I first trained, when I came out of the training, I was going to open my funeral home. It's going to be called the Eighth House, and then when I started doing all my research, and I have to X amount. What? It's gonna be crazy. You may want to cut this up. I don't know. It's like it was the makeup that I had to. If you're in the state of New Jersey, I had to do X amount of apply the makeup. I'm thinking I should never be putting makeup on a
Mm.
body, right? I'm not in the, and so I still have my email saved and the idea of this. And part of me feels like there's a reclaiming or a return that the younger funeral directors are connected to. And, and, and I mean this with all respect, because I've worked with my dad's funeral home. They were the most gracious and spent so much time with me and gave me all the offerings that there might be this bias that funeral homes are pure money machines, right? It's a money, and this doula care is a relationship. To me, I think the funeral directors can come way up into somebody's planning of end of life, and doulas can go beyond the death and be part of funeral homes. And so it doesn't have to be like a handoff. The end of life doulas, we're only there until the person dies and the funeral director takes over with the disposition and plans. There can be a gracious overlap and a continuum of care if we are focused on the family at that point, a circle of care around that. So part of me really feels like, I read a lot of stuff, and the baby boomers are reclaiming, and they want rituals, and they want family involved, and some are interested in green burials, and the doulas can actually educate in that space. It's like, they can provide the options to the family. And once again, it's a complement, and it's about the relationship, providing the options and then honoring the choices that are made. And we don't need to cut out funeral directors. They can be they can be an option. And depending on the funeral home, my funeral home, in hindsight reflected back, I cremated my dad's body, and they were so open and transparent. It's like, then you don't need to buy this coffin. We rent the coffin. And so then my dad was in in a cardboard box inside this coffin. And then they took my dad out of the box, and he went to be cremated. And my experience and personal experience is they were so gracious and transparent. I get the feeling that the funeral directors sometimes get a bad rap around that component of death. And people are vulnerable at that point in time. My experience have been that it comes down to educating funeral directors of the value add of a doula and not the replacement of a funeral director.
And in the last couple of minutes, can you talk to me about like
Yeah.
how you would go about that? Like you personally, what is your kind of pitch to funeral directors in general?
We have had several conversations with the NFDA. I have not personally reached back out to any funeral homes, but I do go back. The funeral home in where my dad was service was, and I've gone back there several times. I've spoken. The father of the funeral home has since died. The son has taken over. But of course, I'm in New Jersey. But one of our educators, and what she does is she's toured the local funeral homes. Right? She's actually gone to the local crematorium and built those relationships. And it does start with a relationship and a dialogue. And so now there's the doula, one of our educators, knows if somebody is looking for more of a funeral home that might be doing this service or this service or this service, or And so the doula is now educated in options and has built these relationships. I think the relationships need to come at a community level. Would certainly be the movement. We would love to be, at an FDA doing a presentation and building, we could say, creating opportunities for doulas to be in a larger organization. I think that's what the organization could do. But at a local, we just need to have some dialogue around the value add of the services of what a doula does and the educating of, and then there are real strict laws that we ask the doulas to abide by. You probably know there's been 2 legal court cases, one in Indiana and one in California.
Yeah, we've covered them.
I think it starts wonderful. Yeah, so it needs to be at a community level. Like it needs a community level. And when I become more established in New Jersey, I will reach out to the funeral. It's like it's a place to the doula if they want to provide this care. It's another pathway that individuals could come to the doula. And once again, I think it's a value add for funeral homes.
And that is really all I have for you, unless you have something else for me. Is there something I should have asked and didn't, or something you thought you'd get the opportunity to say, but I didn't provide it?
No, I really, as much as you just asked me about how, going at a local funeral director, like having this conversation with you is another way to just start dialogue. And I appreciate that.
Thank you so much for your time.
So the person who helped me set up this interview didn't give me permission to name them, and I'm not going to, even though this is kind of a trivial thing that they told me. One of the things, as you recall from the show that just ended, that I'm really interested in is more dialogue between funeral directors and end-of-life doulas. And this person had just come back from Doula-palooza in New Orleans and said that there were lots of funeral professionals on the panel. So that's fantastic to hear. And if you were one of those funeral professionals and you want to reach out and tell me what your take on it was, I would love to hear it. But this is a topic that I feel is important for funeral directors, because I think that as personalization becomes so much more important, doulas are going to play a big role in that. So I would love to hear your take on it, though. So as always, please reach out to me, and you can do that in the show notes. And I would love to hear whatever you have to say, and I will share it if you'd like me to. Funeral Service Insider, the podcast, is a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and edited by me, Tony Russo. As I mentioned, you can reach me via the website. Please subscribe wherever you're listening now. If you go to the web page in the show notes, there will be a button that says follow. If you click on that button, you will be directed to a page with every podcatcher on the planet listed. Just click on yours and you'll be subscribed. Alternatively, if you know what your podcatcher is, just open it up now and type Funeral Service Insider. We're the only podcast with that name. And that will do us for this week, and I will check in with you next time.